nice to see you again on this beautiful day. And this time again with a quote by James Clear, where he says, if you do not actively choose a better way, then society, culture, and the general inertia of life will push you into a worse way. The default is distraction, not improvement. What do you think about that, man?
Great to be back, my friend. And on this beautiful day, some of us are 13 time zones away in the Philippines. So it is also a beautiful night at the same time as it being a beautiful day.
Yeah.
And regarding this quote, it's a great pointer at something that's super important. And he's kind of calling us to override something very central about our psychology as humans, which is we're a little bit hive-minded. We're very much inclined to look around to the people over here, look around to the people over here, the people that are immediately near us, and to mirror their behaviors, to absorb their desires as if they're our own, and to follow in line and go in the direction of the herd. We have kind of a herd mentality. And of course, this has two sides of it. This can foster connection, this can lead to shared experience with people, this can be anti-isolating, all of which are quite important to our psychology and our well-being, etc. However, we can get those same fruits without sacrificing our well-being, without sacrificing our purpose in life, without giving up our mission or really our potential. And it's increasingly important to pay attention to what are the fruits of these habits? What are the fruits of the behaviors that are considered normal in my society, in the people around me, in the groups around me? What if I take a step back and observe this whole thing on the outside and see, okay, this seems to be like this, and what are the real effects of the causes? What are the outputs of the inputs that I'm getting? And to just kind of get us kicked off on one example that I think is fairly clear to me at this point is that the normal habits around phone use, social media, our digital lives is pathological and completely unhealthy, addictive, and causes us to view ourselves in the world in a fundamentally unhealthy way that leads to comparison with others, that hijacks our dopamine system and leaves us unable to concentrate and constantly distracts us from things that are our deeper, thicker desires by causing us to be constantly jumping from one hit of dopamine to the next every 10 seconds and constantly having this hall of mirrors in which we are imagining how we are perceived by others online and oftentimes consumed by this self-image and self-narrative that we would like to craft in order to have some perception in the minds of others or some audience syndrome imagined perception in the eyes of others. And what I think is important as it relates to this as well as other things is to recognize that what we see on the outside in others, the sides that others present on social media that may look very appealing and very enviable and very high status, oftentimes mask an inner world that comes along with many of these habits of being obsessed with our digital presence and getting interrupted every 7 seconds and having a fundamentally unhealthy and addicted dopamine system, which is this sense of lack, distraction, unhappiness, unsatisfactoriness to our experience that a huge proportion and an increasing proportion of our species is experiencing when you pay attention to the fruits of and the behaviors that are displayed subtly associated with many of these things. How do you think about some of the pitfalls that if we just try to be average, if we follow the crowd, we may not ultimately be enriching our lives or walking our path in the wisest way?
Yeah, well, if we only follow others and we don't listen to ourselves, then obviously we don't lead a life in the most optimal way, optimizing for like self-evolution, optimizing for the pyramid of needs which Maslow proposes when you self-actualize actually. So if distraction is the norm, other people distract you from your core, from your true self, from how you really could actually self-actualize, then yeah, you lose out on your potential. And why not just like see what your potential is and then try to bring that to life, what God gave to you, what is like from your core of being. You are unique and you have abilities no one else has in this combination. Maybe you have traits no one else has in this combination. So your task in life is to really seek out your uniqueness and really make that uniqueness productive for society, for yourself, for others. But you can't do that if you're constantly distracted by trying to give other people a perception of you which you are not. That is like trying to serve an identity which is given to you instead of trying to build out your own identity which you think is inherent in your DNA, like is your uniqueness, trying to shape out your uniqueness, like Michelangelo chuck away the pieces which were not David. So this masterpiece of David came out. And in a similar way, distraction is the opposite then of constant and never-ending improvement, like Tony Robbins phrases with CANI, C-A-N-I, constant and never-ending improvement. And yeah, you have to actively choose it. You have to actively choose it. And this reminds me actually, well, I've been to Manila and Intramuros now. It's like the historic part of town where the Spaniards came in and built walls and churches, and the missionaries came back and forth between Acapulco in Mexico and Manila in the Philippines. And there was a wood kind of artwork which copied Michelangelo's Genesis, where, you know, the picture where God sits in this cloud, reaches out, stretches out his arm to the maximum, but then Adam reclines on the cloud and puts his finger there, and God stretches out his finger like this, but Adam just has this, and he can actually actively choose whether he wants to stretch out his finger and reach God and not. And this little movement is just the thing that we have to actively choose to connect to our higher selves, to reach and fulfill our true potential, to fulfill the mission that the divine gave us. And the best part about it, and I think Michelangelo is genius there, in the cloud in which God resides, this resembles the human brain in a perfect way. Like, it's like God resides in the brain and you have to actively choose your higher self. Really love this artwork. This is just a masterpiece. So this is actually you as a human have to actively decide whether you want to fulfill your potential or not. So this is the fight between the lower self and the higher self. What do you think about the fight between these two selves?
Man, a wonderful pointer. And I've never actually recognized this implication. I've seen obviously that work of art so many times. It's such a cool pointer to point that it shows this total near effortless gesture that is required to fully connect with the divine. It's that's really a cool thought starter. I will appreciate that work of art in a new way. And I think what you point to is something totally true. This is something that's been on my mind even recently, which is the sense that if we are diverging from the crowd, on some sense, we must choose to listen to some voice over the majority of the voices around us, which is not natural to us. This is not something that is effortless to most of us. This is something that we're almost unlearning what we have learned to do through our years of schooling and socialization, which is to fit in, be acceptable to others, be normal, et cetera, et cetera. And what's occurred to me, though, is once we listen to the divine voice, once we feel the guidance of our inner awareness and the light within us, and once that voice says something to us, or more accurately, in my experience, pulls us in some direction, speaks to us softly without words in a way that we can hear the signal only if we truly have a heart to listen. If we then take that message, we feel that message, we receive that message, but then we go out and we allow that to be shouted over by the people walking around us that may wish to continue the inertia of their own patterns or may be unaware of their own patterns. And there's nothing, I would say, judgmental toward that, but we should recognize that if we are listening to those voices and we are allowing those voices to cover up and to shout over and to overrule the voice of the divine, the voice of our awareness, the voice of the intuition, and this light within us that calls us forward to whatever it might at whatever point in our life, then we are making a fundamental statement about who we trust, what we value, what we prize, what our highest value is, what our highest honor is. And an intention that all of us will be imperfect because there's temptation on these paths. We're just humans. These are evolved tendencies and heavily societally conditioned tendencies that we have. But nonetheless, if we are following our highest purpose, if we have faith, then we should learn to listen to that voice and even to follow that voice if all the other voices around us and all the other models around us are going in a different direction. That is true courage. That is true boldness and true faith. And in my experience, it's the times when I've done that, the decisive moments when I've really taken a different path in life versus what everybody around me was doing. When I've stepped out of the boat and into the water, following the divine light. This is when we can grow and evolve and step into far more open possibilities, when we can have courage to overcome our fear by listening to the true GPS system that we have within us. This is what really can unlock our world and expand our destiny far beyond what would be possible if we had just put our head down, shrunk, and followed the crowd and tried not to have our head above where we would be exposed. How do you think about this, this voice, listening to it, and maybe even overruling the louder stimuli that are around us? How do we practice this, and how do we know that we're listening to the right voice?
Wonderful question. So you're right about not judging. It's not judgmental if people who don't even recognize that they have this lower you, which is just a follower in the system, which is just the fulfiller of the societal, the role given by society. If you don't know, if you don't have any reference experiences, then you don't have to be judged for that. So
Yeah.
it's like developing awareness is like the key towards change, towards effective change actually. If you're aware of this leads to something what I do, and the effects of that what I do lead to another thing, then you develop kind of wisdom. If you learn to be aware of the higher order consequences of your actions and of your thoughts, then it is a good path you're on. And then you only have to connect it to the visions you have about yourself and develop the awareness of your inner voice, of your inner guiding system. And you kind of feel that if you develop this awareness through training, for example. You kind of feel what feels right and what feels wrong. And you don't like fulfill the expectations of others anymore if it feels wrong, just to please them, just to mitigate the risk of being judged by them or being dismissed by them. Yeah, and I see for some people it is really hard to do that because they experienced some early childhood trauma in their life. So there's no judgment in not being able to do that. But still there's the invitation of, hey, if you really want to try to develop your higher self, then try and experiment with techniques to train your awareness, to train your ability to listen to yourself. And then the general inertia of life won't push you into the worst way because you actively choose a better way for yourself.
Cultivating awareness is so different than so many of the other things that we might try to cultivate. And one analogy that I think is quite helpful and speaks to me for sure is in playing guitar. Compare awareness to playing guitar. So they both kind of start out the same. Like they start off with you suck and it's frustrating and it feels like it's going to take forever to get good and it's frustrating to even play around with this thing because you suck so bad. The difference is when I play guitar, I'm like ding, 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 and it's a little bit out of tune and it sounds terrible and I can't get my fingers to fully make the bar chords and blah blah blah, and it's frustrating. But I've heard Stevie Ray Vaughan play guitar before. I've heard Jimi Hendrix play guitar before. I know the potential of this project, and I see how my friend who's been doing this for 6 months can already play some scales that sound kind of cool, and he can play through these songs. And then I see my friend who's played for a couple years, now he can do this, and then I see your guitar skills and you can put shit on loop and you can play over them, and I'm like, oh, man, that sounds cool. And I can visualize what it looks like to be good at guitar. I can hear it, and I can sense that, okay, I see other people that are further ahead than me on this skill curve. And they're telling me how they got there. I see how they went from here to here to here to here with these sorts of inputs over this amount of time. And I see this potential of playing guitar over here because I'm listening to it in my earbuds on Spotify. And I can understand that, I can recognize that. It's undeniable to me what it is like to be good at guitar. The issue with awareness, on the other hand, which, by the way, is obviously, at least obvious to me, a much more useful skill in terms of what it empowers us in our life, if we're not Jimi Hendrix at least. And the unfortunate part of awareness, though, is it's just as frustrating at the beginning, maybe even more frustrating, to just be sitting still, observing your mind and refuse to shut the hell up, and being frustrated and caught up and don't know if I'm wasting my time, I don't know if I'm doing this right, and blah, blah, blah. And there are people, just like guitar, who are at this stage and this stage and this stage and this stage, so much further ahead. But this is all reflected, this is all really shown in the inner experience. And before I've ever started climbing the mountain of awareness, I only know what my brain is like. And if my awareness is really low, then I'm not really that good at observing the cause and effect of my actions. I'm just kind of
Yes.
stumbling around in confusion, thinking, and don't really have any clarity and don't really have good reference points, and nobody else can see it, and nobody's telling me how good or bad this thing is, and I can't measure it, and it's resistant to a lot of these things that we would like to have in terms of tangible progress and tangible path and cause and effect, and I do this and I get this. It's a little bit frustrating because it's in our first person experience. It's a double-edged sword because in fact, our first person experience is what it's like to be us. It's probably the most important thing that we could manifest or move in the right direction in terms of how good is the quality of our existence. However, it is the worst in terms of how well can I measure this? Do I have a scoreboard? Can I showcase it to others? Can I tell that I'm making progress? Am I holding on and able to cling to every ounce of progress that I make? Or is it like surfing where I rode that wave and now it's fully gone and now I got to ride a wave all over again? Different type of skill. And for me, I can say that I bounced off this whole meditation project a few different times and just got frustrated and quit, or the project of improving my inner world, until I had some pretty intense spiritual experiences on some compounds that altered my state and made me see that, holy shit, my brain could be like this, my experience could be like this, my experience could be like this, my experience could be like this. There's a totally different landscape of the inner world. It can be completely different to be me. And to complete the analogy, this is not, I forget what teacher said this, but it was as if all of a sudden I was on stage and I was Jimi Hendrix for an hour and I felt what it was like to totally shred on the guitar. And then I came back and I wasn't, but I was like, whoa, there's a totally different way I could be. There's a totally different way this brain could feel. There's a totally different
Yes.
way that I could experience existence. And that made me see for the first time that, whoa, there is a there, that it matters what it's like to be me. It matters if I'm just swimming around in samsara or if I'm free within, if I'm awake within, if the light can shine and I can be at true peace and ease from the divine radiance at the core of our being. It makes a huge difference. And in the end, it took even longer to discover this, but in the end, that connection with the source can empower us so much more than the next concept I could learn ever could. And that's a power that's invisible to many of us. We can't compare. It's not like weight and fitness where I can go to the gym and I can see who's further ahead, who's further back. It's also not like a fitness in the sense of nobody else is going to see directly, at least, if I'm further ahead or further back. It is a single player game, but it is one of the most important single player games we could possibly play because it's upstream of pretty much everything else that we do. This determines the quality of our mind. This determines what our influences greatly, what we are able to do in the world, the risks that we are able to take, the ways that we are able to manifest our goals, the things that we can create, the visions that we can have, the ways that we can feel and connect and love others. So many of these things have to do with what we're working with inside. So it's quite a
Yeah.
practice, quite a path. What do you think
Yes.
about this?
is definitely a path. And going back to your guitar experience, it's like it sucks recognizing that you are not as good as you envision yourself to be. And it's like painful. You feel it, that you're aware of it, that there's a discrepancy between the two states, like the thing you want to reach and the thing you hear right now. But you also recognize staying in that pain helps you improve. If you distract yourself from it, you will move away. You will get away from the guitar. You won't practice anymore. So it helps to have this awareness and also raise your negative capability of taking in the pain and staying with the pain and soothe yourself, because it's just pain. It's just in your mind. It helps you improve because you find ways around it. You don't need to distract yourself from it. It's also like hints. If you distract yourself from pain with different kinds of strategies, with drinking out with friends, distracts you from your pain you have in your relationship. Smoking cigarettes distracts you from the pain of boredom, and so on. So you have these kinds of distraction mechanisms that are nothing else just to differ your state that you feel, and this doesn't help you in the long run. But as you said, if you experience like this mystical breakthrough, if you experience one day that your mind can experience altered states as well, that you don't have to be stuck in that one kind of state. There is a different kind of game to be played, because now you can choose, oh, I have a different kind of reference experience. I can choose to feel like different just with the blink of an eye, in an instance of a second. I can change my inner state to something different. And that's something very powerful to experience. But if you have never experienced how powerful that can be, you are not to be judged because you haven't experienced it. Still, there's the invitation. Hey, try to experience these kinds of mind-altering states as well for yourself. May it be just through the connection of nature, just to sitting in quiet, just to playing the guitar, improving yourself, but also listening to what you like when you play the guitar, because your task is to develop your own uniqueness. And if you play the guitar, you make mistakes, but Jimi Hendrix has his own like style, like the other guitar players have their own style. They just played on. They stayed in their pain. They enjoyed what they heard sometimes, and they tried to do more of that. So this is actually the way, not to distract yourself from when you suck. So, but just try on, try on, try on until you don't suck anymore, or at least until you like what you do. The same with your inner experience. If it sucks, try to stay in the pain, but try to be curious about it and try to explore what you like about it, maybe. There are definitely in every kind of inner state, there are tiny little things that are likable. And then just explore them. Be curious about them and try to experience more of them. Try to find out how did that thing, that little likable thing that you feel, come to be. Try to experience more of that. Try to do more of that, what makes you experience that, and so on. And yeah, for me it has proven to be the connection with nature this is like on a big priority for me. Like, if I don't have nature around me, I don't feel as alive as I am. So I don't want to lose that. And that's why I choose that actively and don't be like in a corset in my role society puts me in. I just said, okay, I'll leave that for a moment just to reconnect again. But it takes risk, it takes a little courage. But as well, humans are really risk averse
Yes.
creatures. But so they sometimes, in most risks, they overestimate and they underestimate the opportunities taking the risk brings. So this kind of misjudgment, or yeah, this kind of misjudgment maybe,
Bias.
yeah, this kind of bias leads to missed opportunities, actually. This leads to missed improvements, missed potential that you maybe find. What do you think about that, Payne?
This is exactly right. The heuristic machine of our brain is not calibrated to the modern world, where you can do something in 3 years that can provide you freedom for the rest of your life, or you can pursue this opportunity and fail, and you can completely recover and be right back where you were a year later.
That
You have
takes
so much more
courage.
to Yes, yes. You have so much more to gain than you have to lose from having the courage to follow the voice within and take risks where you step completely away from the herd mentality that's just kind of going forward with the inertia of habits and the inertia of conditioned patterns. And it does come back in part to where do we get this courage? Where do we get this strength to overrule our conditioned tendencies and the fear sets of our mind that are largely evolved in groups where ostracization or being cast out of the group and leaving the group meant death? Our whole systems, our whole minds literally fear that we are going to die if we do something that gets us kicked out from the group of the people that we're immediately around. It's super stimulating to us. It's super scary to our natures. But to your point, awareness can enable us to step out of this and to recognize that we do have a power over our mind. If I used to kind of have this implicit logic in my mind that if I do something out in the world that feels bad, if I get rejected, or if I get shamed, or if I get cast out or judged by others, or viewed negatively or disrespected or whatever, that these are objective things that must have a certain level of psychological negative effect on me. There's no way around this. I just have to make sure that these dangers that I perceive don't happen, and I have to control what's going on in other people's minds and in the world, because once somebody judges me or I get rejected from a group, then I'm really fucked. That was the kind of the logic of the brain. But to your point earlier, it's, man, I wish I remembered this Alan Watts quote, but there's some quote about once you recognize that you do have this power to change your own state, once you do recognize that you have agency over your mind, you are ultimately the one that's in the driver's seat. Not to say that you can completely control thoughts, but you can control your posture toward thoughts. You can control whether or not you are fighting against things and treating problems like they're real problems that have to be a problem that you hate, or if you can recognize that you have an ability to flow with and ride the wave, whatever the wave may be. That can enable you to say, okay, I want to take risks. I want to feel this pain or expose myself to these sources of pain because I recognize that I have so much more to gain than I have to lose, and I can recover from whatever losses that I take. And this can enable you to lean into that shit, take real risks that can give you big rewards, and rewards that are never possible if you follow the crowd. The rewards that are never possible if you just go with the inertia of what you're conditioned and what people around you say you should do. It's important, I think, to recognize that the risks don't all lie in stepping out of the boat and doing that. There's a lot of hidden risk in just going with the inertia of continuing to work at a corporate job, for example. Like, I remember when I quit my corporate job to, and not to say that corporate is bad, it's not better or worse to be an entrepreneur versus corporate, but just to point out that the risks doesn't all fall on one side. I stepped out of the corporate job and everybody was like, shit, that's pretty crazy. I don't think I would ever do that. Not that they weren't judgy, they were supportive or whatever, but they're like, that couldn't be me. That's a big risk. That's very risky. And I agree, it was very risky. And I did go out and I did get the shit pummeled out of me, and I experienced immense pain, and I almost failed a couple times, and it was really difficult, and it was painful. It stretched me to my limits. I paid real costs and endured real sacrifices, and that side of it is real. But what is not true is that staying in corporate was without risk. What is going to happen in 5 years after 5 more years of already having this super intelligence? Do you think that Unilever is going to need as many financial analysts as it did before there was a program that could instantly do all the work except way better and way more accurate? No. There's a ton of risk to being in corporate right now because most of the people doing white collar knowledge work, the analysts, the senior analysts, the middle managers, the senior managers that are managing the analysts and the senior analysts, there are programs that are already way better at doing 99% of that. They're just not as good at yapping around conference tables yet. But organizations are going to wake up to this. Those jobs are going to get slashed. We're going to need a fifth of them, and then we're going to need a tenth of them. and they're not going to be there. And then there's the whole thing about how much you're learning, how much adaptability you gain, how much you cultivate an ability to adapt to the changes of the environment, the different circumstances, etc. And in fact, in my view, you're way more exposed if you've never had to fend for yourself, if you finally get thrust out into the wild and your skill set is obsolete and you've never had to learn a new skill set and you've never had to adapt to a new environment. I think they're actually, not to say that I'm right or one side is right or wrong, but there's an argument on both sides here, and the risks present themselves much differently. And I think one is a clearer risk where you know you're going and hunting everything that you kill, and you got to go perform today if you want to eat, and it's all on you and it's explicit, versus a more hidden risk where I'm getting my monthly paycheck, monthly paycheck, monthly paycheck, monthly paycheck. Everything is smooth, everything is steady, there's no volatility, and then psh, it's done all of a sudden, and then I'm caught and I don't know how to go hunt my next meal. And I don't have the skill sets because I just had been investing in this one narrow skill tree that no longer exists or no longer exists for me. There's this program that's better than me at my own job, and it's getting better much faster than I can get better at things. So a lot of the stories about what really is risky, especially in an incredibly changing world, are much different than what they might appear to be or what the main consensus may suggest. And ultimately, if we are a slave to the consensus, if we are unable to feel the pain of feeling weird, if we are unable to feel the pain of rejecting the common patterns of those around us, then we are going to kind of be at the mercy of a hive mind that is fundamentally inflexible in its thoughts and not that good at recognizing that the situation of tomorrow is probably not going to be like the situation of yesteryear. How are your thoughts on real risk, taking chances, being bold in our path, and perhaps the ways that there's risk one way or another, and they may have different forms?
Yeah, what you talked about was the turkey illusion,
Yes.
coined by Gerd Gigerenzer, a German, I guess it was a psychologist, where Thanksgiving comes around every year, but the turkey gets fed like almost for 1 year and thinks, okay, I get fed the next day. And every day he gets fed, the likelihood increases, that the perceived likelihood for him, for her increases, that she's certain about that the butcher comes and feeds her again. And with each day the farmer feeds her, she thinks the next day is more likely to be fed. But until the last day, where she has the highest perceived likelihood that the farmer will feed her, she will actually die, because Thanksgiving comes around. And Thanksgiving, the turkey comes in the oven. It is oftentimes like that in life. The bigger the corporate job is, and now Germany has the same challenge now. The big corporate jobs like they had in the automobile industry of, let's say, Audi, VW, and so on. They get cut out bit by bit because they were on their high horse and so on, and they said, the EV market comes after us, but we are bigger, we have so much global sales volume and so on. But if you don't act upon a rapidly changing world, then the world will reform itself, then the power structures will reformat themselves. And yeah, that's an illusion that only because yesterday your sales have been good, but the world is changing fast, then tomorrow the sales also will be good. And the same with corporate jobs. Only because tomorrow is the day you will be the longest in your job since ever, doesn't mean that you will keep it forever with the same likelihood. So it is better to partially get out into the wild and try to survive a little bit, or get out into groups in the wild and survive together. Collect a group of friends and build something nice, or create space where you feel welcome and warm. Like, it doesn't have to be about money, it's also about community. Just because you have a group of friends doesn't mean that you will have them forever. Also, get out and try to be likable, try to give value first, try to be nice to people, try to be kinder than yesterday, and try to be a little bit more generous than yesterday. Maybe like that. Try systems which work and help you improve. Otherwise, trusting that that yesterday will be like tomorrow is, the faster the world changes, the more likely it is that it will be a losing game. And so it is like, it goes right maybe a decade, but then in 1 or 2 days everything changes. And this is actually what Lenin said. There are there are days, there are years where decades happen. No, there are something around the lines of, okay, there are parts of time where decades happen, but there are days. No, I will refigure that and we talk about it next. But
I'm picking up your drift.
the point is, like, for a long time, anything will go good and nothing happens. That's the way. But then, in a short amount of time, everything happens. And this is the asymmetry of time, in a sense. You see the same thing in markets. Look at Lehman
Yes,
Brothers Bank. They
yes.
made bit by bit by bit by bit increasing, but they hid the risks under the carpet, and then the risks exploded under the carpet. So there were days in which decades happened. And I will look up the quote, but the days where decades happened, actually. Like,
And this
everything
seems
they
to
made
be
in hundreds of years, they lost in a few kind of weeks.
100%. And this seems to be a principle of nature to me, is that what does not bend does snap all at once. And it applies so much to markets. It applies to our own paths and the perceived consistency or risk. And it's this concept that when you suppress volatility, then volatility erupts all at once, or it's sort of like an earthquake. If you have two tectonic plates and they don't move and they don't move, but their pressure builds, then it snaps all at once. And that's when the biggest earthquake happens, is when it's the most pent up. It wasn't released bit by bit. The volatility didn't have room to breathe along the way. And so all of a sudden, boom, something snaps. And this is not just true in markets, it's definitely true in our lives. But one thing that you pointed out that I think is a really good balancing to a lot of what we've been talking about, because it's something that I missed for years as I was on this path. I learned how important it was to wake up and to diverge from the crowd and to boldly chart my own path and to reject the the consensus voice or the pressures of society and the people around us. But in doing so, I went to the other end and out of balance in a different way, which is this mindset that I am a lone wolf and I only need me and my thoughts are completely independent. I need no support because I have this light within and I sense the power of the divine and I feel this richness and this infinite wellspring of awareness. And that was actually imbalanced and misguided in its own ways, because yes, many of those things are true. The power that points to is true, but it is also true that we are social creatures. We are primates. We are Homo sapiens. And I can't think my way out of that, and I can't shout over that to make it untrue. And in the end, we do find ourselves within societies. We find ourselves surrounded by other humans, and inevitably that means that just given the base rates of humans with X mindset versus Y mindset, we're going to be surrounded by the herd mentality so much, and yet we probably don't want to conform to the herd mentality for a lot of the reasons we've said. That said, it is all the more important to find those connections, to find that circle, to find our five chimps, and to have that support from other humans, because if we don't, then we might be able to sustain our island of me riding my own wave psychologically, spiritually, etc., with nobody to talk to about it, with no support, with no reinforcement, with no encouraging, with no basically alignment with other humans. But it's not sustainable, actually. After time, we are going to go back into the world and we're going to get conditioned, and people are going to frame things in a certain way, and then this will get repeated, and then certain mindsets will come out. We're surrounded by a culture, and piece by piece by piece, we are going to get pulled back into a more typical way of being, back into a more reactive way of being, back into a more egoic and more thinky and more concerned about our status and about this and that and the words of others, the perceptions of others, our self-image, our self-narrative, etc. There is a strong gravity to these things, and it's not one that, at least speaking for myself, I can see that I'm quite limited. I can see that there's not an omnipotence in this brain of mine, and I can see that causes do have effects in me just like everybody else, and I'm not exempt. And so what this showed me is just the importance of, doesn't have to be with 100 people, doesn't have to be with 50 people, but the importance of connection with like-minded people, or not even like-minded people, with people that are also riding their own waves, with people that are also not beholden to whatever the consensus around them is, with people that are interested in connecting, interested in exploring, curious, bold, similar or some value shares, and in a certain frame of their own. Because if it's just us with our own framing, it can get drowned, at least speaking for myself. Some people may be exempt from this, but I found the hard way that I am not exempt. If I just try to be an island out in the world and don't surround myself at all, don't connect with at all people who are of similar values, then there is a tractor beam of conditioning. There is a tractor beam of society that will pull us into these herd mindset. But a strong antidote can be even a few close, deep, trusted connections with people that also are riding their own wave, also striving to live a life that is aware, chart a path that is their own, and be independent.
We want to be part of the A team and not just another foot soldier.
Yes, 100%. 100%. Yep. So this podcast actually has been a great force for me in that, and connecting about these ideas, sharing about them, and expressing them, listening to your point of view. Is even a small dose once a week, I find, can be helpful for that reason, as well as, of
Very
course,
much.
some other conversations and relationships that we can cultivate as we find interesting, curious people over time.
Very much.
So that is it from me. My intention this week is to not just assume that because I understand these concepts that I'm going to follow them. I really, every day is a new day. Every day we need to carry the water, so to speak, and ride the wave. And none of this stuff is necessarily for keeps, and we shouldn't trust that just because we've learned these things before that we will always hold on to them. And so it's one thing to agree with this, it's one thing for me to say these things, but this week I have an intention, and today I have an intention to pay attention, to bring awareness to my patterns, to bring awareness to some of the ways that I might be living and embodying aligned with my values, and some ways that I may have picked up certain conditioning, that I may not be fully abiding what I would like to abide. And yeah, just to bring that awareness and convert the learnings into actual actions, and pay attention to my own heart and my own mind this week. What about you? What do
Wonderful.
you hope to bring into the week?
Wonderful, Peyton. Thanks, man. I want to bring into the week to be like Adam, but in the next frame where I stretch out my index finger and reach my higher self, you know? Just try to establish an improvement routine bit by bit in a controlled environment like this nice location here in Port Barton where I wake up and breathe and meditate and exercise a little bit and do some work that is important to me and then connect with nature. With that, just focus on improvement and focus on reaching out to God.
100%. 100%. He's already always available right here, and not at a far distance. It's just that.
Just with a little effort, but you have to actively choose.
Yes, 100%. Thank you for sharing, my friend. Wonderful talking to you. I will see you on the next one.
Amen. Likewise, man. See you soon. Have a great
Bye.
day, man.
You too.
Bye.